Hey guys, so really quick, I posted on my social media that I had this dream that I wanted to share with everyone. But before I get into that really quick, I wanted to first talk about the viral video going on where the pastor is talking about the dreams he had. In particular, the ones where he saw a calendar and he saw a hand underscore March, a hand underscore June, a hand underscore September and November, respectively. One of the main things I wanted to point out in that video was the word he kept using was chaos. And that stood out to me because many of you who follow me on social media and those I've talked to and read some of my blogs and whatnot, I talked frequently, well not frequently, but I've mentioned before how I kept seeing the number 11, right? And that number 11 showed up so much that it started to just make my eye twitch. I was like, I mean, when I seen it, I mean, it showed up everywhere. It showed up in my sleep. It showed up on my receipts. It showed up on my watch. I look at the time, it's 11. I look at the TV, it's 11. I will play a video game. 11 was miraculously show up somewhere. Man, I would talk to somebody, ask them their birthday, they'd say, oh, something 11. What? So it was like 11 was just everywhere. So I'm just like, okay, it's clear that you want me to look into this because you keep throwing this in my face. So I remember one day I did, and I was in a church parking lot after Bible study with some of my friends, and I realized then in that moment when I looked it up that the number 11 meant chaos, disorder, and judgment. And this was back in like 2016, I want to say, right before the election. Anyway, so that was something that really stood out to me. One thing that he said stood out to me. The second thing that stood out to me when he was talking about the soldiers marching, right? He said there were soldiers invading, and many people have saw something very similar. I know for the last few years, a few years ago, I had dreams where America was invaded. People thought it was impossible, and they kind of thought it was crazy. But I'm not going into details on the particular dream, but I just remember seeing these troops in the street, right? And I remember hearing bombs just going off everywhere and gunfire. And I remember at the end of the dream, I looked out the window and I noticed two things. One, I noticed the armies, some of the armies that were there. For one, there's like two of them surprised me, like Portugal and Mexico. Like, why are they invading? And then I saw Russia, and there was an Islamic nation. I can't remember which one it was. But the second thing that stood out to me was I saw children, soldiers, okay? But they were like, I was looking and they're like American children, right? And they were terrified, but they had these guns. And I'm like, are we so bad off now that we have children fighting our wars? And then I had another dream before that where I saw this beast, right? It was like King Kong, and it was just like terrorizing the streets, and it's like rampaging through and destroying everything. And then it started to pursue me, and then I hid. And I remember looking out the attic window, and the beast transformed into the Chinese army, and then they started marching through the streets. I'm like, what in the world? And this was around the same time, probably a little bit before. So those things, there were things that I've saw myself, and other things that I'll get into a little bit later. But it's important because one thing that you have to understand is that we see through a glass dimly. Remember that we see through a glass dimly. So God gives people bits and pieces of the puzzle, but we're all pretty much seeing the same thing. He breaks it down to us in a language we can understand, so we can effectively communicate it to you guys. And it's no coincidence that so many people are seeing something very similar and are speaking out right now. It's not a coincidence. So don't just shrug it off that people are being doomsday prophets or naysayers or whatever. Listen, all right? So about my dream this morning, I wanted to talk about. So I don't remember everything that led up to this point, but I do remember this, right? There was a little girl. She was black. And people had like these negative feelings towards this little girl. They thought she was a brat. They thought all these bad things about the little girl. Somehow, I didn't see what happened, but her father was taken out of her life. Her father was taken away. And she lost it. She started wailing. She started screaming and rampaging at the top of her lungs. And we were in my childhood neighborhood, right? The neighborhood I grew up in. And she screamed so loud, it brought everybody out their house. So we all came out to see what was going on. And she's on her porch just screaming at the top of her lungs, so upset that her father was taken away from her. And she wanted justice, and she's like, she just screamed. That's all she did was just scream. She had a neighbor. It was a white, cranky old lady, cantankerous. And instead of consoling this little girl, she started berating the girl. She started screaming at her, trying to drown out her voice to get her to stop screaming because she was disturbing her. Why are you screaming? You need to stop. Shut up. And blah. She just was trying to berate the little girl. And the community saw this, and they went to the defense of the little girl. They started attacking the old white lady, getting on her. And as they tried to console the little girl ended up pushing people away because she was so upset and so enraged. Like, she didn't want to hear reason. She didn't want to hear anything people had to say. She was just so pissed and mad. She just kept screaming. And so people eventually just backed off and let her finish, screaming. Then it kind of like from there, people decided to say, hey, you know what? Let's celebrate. Let's throw a party, whatever. I don't really remember why, but they moved to have a party, like a block party. And I remember I'm looking at this, I'm observing, and my sister wanted to go. And I'm like, I don't think I'm going to go. But I'm looking at the houses, and like the houses were white, but they were like deteriorating and decaying. And like, it's like some of the houses had bullet holes. And I'm like, huge bullet holes. So I'm looking like, what's going on? Like, it was just, the community, the neighborhood was just decaying and deteriorating. So then my attention was drawn to the sky. And I look up, and at first it was like blue sky, beautiful. But then I looked a little further, down the horizon, and I saw clouds, storm clouds rolling in. But these weren't like normal storm clouds. Like, these storm clouds were like black and like really ominous. And as I'm watching, I see like lightning just flashing everywhere. But then it's like, I had like another layer of vision, and I look closer, and I started to notice like these clouds aren't normal. It's like these clouds are breathing. Like, these clouds are alive. And they were like pulsating and throbbing like I had a heartbeat. And I'm like, what? I'm like, that isn't normal. Like, that doesn't look right. So I tell my sister, I said, hey, you need to come back and get in this house, because that storm that's coming doesn't look right. And so like, she said, I'll be back in time, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay. So then I stood on my back porch, and I'm just like watching. And then the clouds just descended, boom, came upon the earth, and it started cascading and rolling through the streets. And then people started screaming and running to and fro. And then my sister started running back to the house. And, other people started coming in like it was like the house was like Noah's Ark. But they started running into the house where I was. And I remember I'm watching this cloud try to snatch my sister, and like swirling around her, but it couldn't like grab a hold of her. And I'm looking, and for you comic fans, I was looking at it, and I remarked in the dream, like, that's like the Venom symbiote, right? And so then she got there, and like darkness it was just super dark. It was daytime, but it was like darkness. The world was covered in darkness and in these clouds, right? And so then, like I said, people start coming in, whatever, and I'm just going to end it right there because I'm just going to end right there. So what does this dream mean? One of the things that stood out to me in this dream was the darkness, right? It wasn't this isn't the only time I've seen this darkness in a dream. I've talked about this darkness in a previous video and blog that I shared called The Vision, A Warning for the American Church. And in that dream, I remember there was this not emissary, but there was like this entity that wanted to enter into our realm, right? It wanted to take over the earth. And I remember in that dream, I'm looking up at it. I didn't see like I didn't see its face or whatever. I saw like an outline, whatever. So I'm looking up at this entity, and it's talking to me, and he was mocking me, but he was also mocking the church, and he was saying, you guys are not ready for what's coming. Like, you guys are not ready for me. Like, you too busy fighting one another. Like, you guys aren't ready. And he sent his emissary down, and we were fighting against the emissary, and we barely beat the emissary. And he was like, yo, basically he was saying, like, if you can barely beat him, what hope do you have against me? And so that was like, I want to say that was like maybe like the first time that I can actually recall ever encountering this principality, this entity that's getting ready to arrive on the earth. Because it's like back then he couldn't come, he couldn't descend upon the earth because it was like a block. There was something that was blocking him. And what comes to mind too is that passage in Thessalonians, I think it's either first, second, where it says the one that's holding the Antichrist back, but he will be moved out the way. But it was kind of like that, because now it's like, now this entity is free to just descend and come upon the earth and wreak havoc. And also think of it like, you know, again, to compare it to like Marvel comics or in movies. In Doctor Strange, there's you remember Dormammu, right? And he wanted to kind of get into our realm, but Doctor Strange kind of blocked him. That's kind of how it was. That's kind of how this entity is. He's like a Dormammu, and he was like wanting to, he's getting ready to just come upon the earth if he's not already here, right? So that's the principality that's coming. And the little girl, to me, as I really mull over this dream, it was a representation of the black community and the protests, and how the black community is just screaming and wanting justice and whatever. Then you have their neighbors who were trying to silence her voice and drown her out. Then you have the community, which is like the world, that was coming to her aid. But the black girl, the child, was so enraged and angry that she couldn't be consoled. And so it was kind of like I was seeing that, and it was like all these things that's coming. But it was like, yo, like what really disturbed me though was the darkness that's about to descend. And guys, like, it's like I'm telling you, it's I'm not saying these things to scare you. Like, I saw these dreams before, and I saw similarities before in dreams, but I'm trying to tell you guys to if you're not doing it already, get serious, get in the spirit, pray in the spirit, get on one accord with God, because we're going to need his protection, we're going to need his wisdom and his guidance. And I know you have a lot of people coming up giving these warnings, but here's the thing about these warnings too. These warnings are given to help us prepare. And although these warnings, some of these warnings do sound dire, there's always hope. Okay, at the end of this, like that cliche goes, it gets darkest before the dawn, because there's going to be a great darkness descending upon the earth. While that darkness descends, there will be a great light. All right, and that great light is going to be the Christ in us, and it's going to be Christ himself. We're going to pierce this darkness, and we're going to be able to reach out and grab people. All right, because that is how the revival will start. The revival is getting prepared, right? It's being prepared right now. And I'm gonna leave with this, because I remember I had this dream about a week or two ago. I shared it on social media too. But at the end of the dream, like, I remembered like so many people were dying. Like, all these people were just, young people were just dying, and I was so sad. And I remember I was talking to this I went into this garden area, right? But it was like in those buildings. I forgot what they're called, but it was like a garden that was inside like a building. And there's like this man that was planting seeds and tending to the garden. And so I'm talking to this man, and I realized who he was later. And we're talking, and I'm like, man, like, I'm so sad. Like, all these young people are dying. He just stops me and says, Kofi, these deaths aren't what you think they are. Like, they have to happen so these new things can come, right? And he had pepper, and he sprinkled the pepper on the ground. And I'm looking confused, like, why is he sprinkling pepper on the ground? But he's saying this is like a representation of the new flavor, the new seasoning that's going to sprout out into the earth, right? And so a lot of old things have to die. A lot of the traditions will have to be done away with. But this new move of God through his spirit is going to be what's going to stand against this darkness. Because as of now, how much we fight and argue with one another, even over a thing about the right of life, we're not ready. We are not ready. And so I've been saying this for the last few years about the American church, and people ignoring me. They thought I was crazy or whatever. But guys, I'm trying to tell you, if I'm wrong, I will welcome being wrong. But I know I'm not. So you can take what I say. First and foremost, take what I say and pray about it. But secondly, prepare. That's what these warnings are for. Is for us to prepare and get ready. Not only ready spiritually, but ready in the natural realm as well. So if you have any other questions, you want to talk to me about this, feel free to hit me up on social media. I'm very friendly. I would say accessible, but lately I've been kind of antisocial. But no, really, if you really want to talk about it, please feel free to talk to me about it. And other prophetic people who's seen things or in dreams and stuff, I'm really willing to and wanting to hear what you have to say. But I'm gonna go ahead and cut this short because it's longer than what I intended it to be. Guys, be safe. I love you, and I'll see you next time.